NCAA college football week number 1 once again here on Robert Sports Show. Now, this is the 3rd year in a row. Will be the 3rd year that I've done college football picks here on Robert Sports Show. In 2017, I had a 73% win-loss percentage, 44% against the spread, 50% over-under. 2018, 74.1% win-loss, 45.9 against the spread, and 50.1 over-under. With bowl games included, I was at 56.2% overall for 2017, brought that to 56.8 in 2018. Who knows what we're going to be here in 2019, but we are back. Make sure you check out Heisman 2020 Watch. Make sure you check out the college football playoff prediction show I already did. Now we are getting into week 1. I know how they we have like 3 games this week and everything else is next week. I just kind of wrapped it all up into week 1 instead of doing the kind of like week 0, week 1, which I've actually done in the past. We're just going to throw week 1 all it is. 54 games for you here. Total 54 picks. We have 43 against the spread, 43 on the over-under. The plan is this year is to do at least 50 a week. So more than likely, since I'm doing 54 this week, I might do like 46 next week to make it even numbers. And then just kind of do 50 each week. Try to pick out the 50 best games. So the first game we have Miami Hurricanes taking on the Florida Gators. Florida is favored by 7 at home, over under 45. I am picking the Gators to win, Miami to cover that 7 and under on the 45. So if you're new to Robert Sports Show, this is what I do. Pick the game, the against the spread, and then whatever the over-under is. Next up, we have the Florida A&M Rattlers versus the UCF Knights. The Knights are favored by 45.5. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 64.5. Next up, we have the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets versus the Clemson Tigers. Clemson favored by 35.5, winning, covering, over on the 59. Next up, the Alabama State Hornets versus the UAB, University of Alabama Birmingham Blazers. Blazers are favored by 43.5 at home. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 51.5. Battle of Texas, Texas State Bobcats versus Texas A&M Aggies. Aggies are favored by 34.5. I got them winning, have the Bobcats covering the 34.5 and taking under on the 57. Next up, we have the San Diego State Jackrabbits versus the Minnesota Golden Gophers. The Golden Gophers are favored by 12.5. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 56.5. Next up, the North Colorado Bears versus the San Jose State Spartans. Spartans are favored by 10.5. I got them winning. I have the Bears covering the 10.5 and under on the 59.5. Next up, you have the Utah Utes versus the BYU Cougars. Utah is favored by 5. I have the Utes winning, the BYU covering the 5, and then over on the 48.5. Next up, we have the Rice Owls versus the Army Black Knights. Black Knights are favored by 23.5, and then winning, covering, and under on the 50.5. Next up, we have the Tulsa Golden Hurricanes versus the Michigan State Spartans. Spartans are favored by 22.5. I got them winning. I got the Hurricanes covering the 22.5, and I'm taking under on the 47. Next up, we have the Wisconsin Badgers versus the South Florida Bulls. The Badgers are favored by 13.5. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 57.5. Next up, the Utah State Aggies versus the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Wake Forest is favored by 3.5. So yeah, Wake Forest is favored by 3.5. I'm giving that 3.5 to Utah State. I had Utah State winning, covering the 3.5, and over on the 63. So that's Wake Forest is favored by 3.5. I'm giving to Utah State, picking Utah State to win. Utah State covers the 3.5 and over on the 63. Next up, we have Colorado State Rams versus Colorado Buffaloes. Buffaloes are favored by 12.5. I have them winning. I have the Rams covering the 12.5 and taking under on the 58.5. Next up, I have the Oklahoma State Cowboys versus the Oregon State Beavers. Cowboys favored by 15.5. I got them winning, covering. I am taking under on the 73.5. I just love how these Big 12 teams have just a high over-under, and because they score a lot of points in the Big 12. Next up, we have the Ole Miss Running Rebels versus the Memphis Tigers. Tigers are favored by 6. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 68. Next up, we have the Akron Zips versus the Illinois Fighting Illini. Illinois favored by 16.5. I got them winning. I got the Zips covering, and I'm taking under on the 56. South Alabama Jaguars versus Nebraska Cornhuskers. Nebraska favored by 36. I got South Alabama covering the 36 and under on the 64.5. Next up, the Florida Atlantic Owls versus the Ohio State Buckeyes. Buckeyes are favored by 27. I have the Owls covering the 27, and I'm taking over on the 63.5. Next up, we have the Washington State Eagles versus the Washington Huskers. The straight-up pick here, Washington Huskies winning. Duke Blue Devils versus the Alabama Crimson Tide. Tide favored by 34.5. This will be over by halftime. Alabama covering over the 34, covering the 34 and over on the 58. Next up, the South Carolina Gamecocks versus North Carolina Tar Heels. Gamecocks favored by 7.5. I got the Tar Heels covering the 7.5, and I'm taking under on the 63. We have Idaho Vandals versus the Penn State Nittany Lions. Straight up pick the Nittany Lions. East Tennessee State Buccaneers versus the Appalachian State Mountaineers. Straight up pick the Appalachian State Mountaineers. Virginia Tech Hokies versus the Boston College Eagles, excuse me. VTech favored by 2.5, winning, covering, and under on the 57. Montana State Bobcats versus the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Straight up pick of the Red Raiders. Syracuse Orange versus the Liberty Flames. Syracuse favored by 17.5, winning, covering, under on the 66. Next up, we have the SMU Mustangs versus the Arkansas State Red Wolves. The Red Wolves are favored by 3, have them winning, covering, and taking over on the 58. Boise State Broncos versus the Florida State Seminoles. Florida State favored by 5. I got them winning. Hold on. Make sure I can read what I wrote down. Florida State favored by 5. I have Boise State winning. I'm giving them the 5 by covering it, and then under on the 53.5. Next up, the Oregon Ducks versus the Auburn Tigers. Auburn favored by 3. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 57.5. Next up, we have the Georgia Bulldogs versus the Vanderbilt Commodores. Georgia favored by 3 touchdowns at 21. I got Vandy covering that, and I'm taking over on the 57.5. Georgia Southern Eagles versus the LSU Tigers. LSU favored by 27.5. Tigers win. Southern Eagles cover. Over on the 53. Next up, Missouri Tigers versus the Wyoming Cowboys. Missouri's favored by 17.5. I have them winning, covering, and I have Tigers winning, the Cowboys covering, and over on the 54. Next up, Virginia Cavaliers versus the Pittsburgh Panthers. Virginia favored by 3. Panthers. I can't talk tonight. Cavaliers favored by 3. I have them winning, covering, and over on the 48. Next up, the Miami Ohio Redhawks versus the Iowa Hawkeyes. Iowa is favored by 21.5. I have them winning. I have Ohio Redhawks covering the 21.5, and then over on the 49. Middle Tennessee Blue Raiders versus the Michigan Wolverines. Wolverines favored by 33. I do have the Blue Raiders covering the 33. I'm taking over on the 54. Louisiana Tech Bulldogs versus the Texas Longhorns. Longhorns are favored by 21. I got the Bulldogs covering the 21, taking under on the 55. New Mexico State Aggies versus the Washington State Cougars. Washington State favored by 32, then winning, the Cougars covering, under on the 64.5. Straight up pick, the Bucknell Bison versus the Temple Owls. Temple Owls winning. Northern Iowa Panthers versus the Iowa State Cyclones. Iowa State favored by 18.5, then winning, covering, and taking under on the 51.5. Indiana State's Sycamores versus the Kansas Jayhawks. Jayhawks favored by 3.5, then winning, covering, and over on the 43.5. Straight up pick, the Virginia Military Keatites versus the Marshall Thunderbird. Marshall winning. Abilene Christian Wildcats versus North Texas Mean Green. Straight up pick, North Texas winning. Houston Baptist Huskies versus the UTEP Miners. Straight up pick, UTEP winning. Webster State Wildcats versus the San Diego State Aztecs. Straight up pick, San Diego winning. Fresno State Bulldogs versus the USC Trojans. USC favored by 13.5. I'm giving that 13.5 to Fresno State. I got Fresno State winning, USC covering, and over on the 52.5. Next up, we have the Sam Houston State Bobcats versus the New Mexico Lobos. Lobos favored by 10, winning, covering, over on the 51.5. Straight up pick, Rhode Island Rams versus the Ohio Bobcats. Bobcats winning. Toledo Rockets versus Kentucky Wildcats. Kentucky favored by 12. I have them winning. Toledo covering the 12, under on the 59. The last straight up pick, Monmouth, New Jersey Hawks versus the Western Michigan Broncos. Broncos straight up pick. Morgan State Bears versus the Bowling Green Falcons. Bowling Green favored by 21.5. Win, cover, and over on the 49.5. The Florida FIU Golden Panthers versus Tulane Green Wave. Tulane favored by 2. I'm giving the 2 to FIU. I got FIU winning, covering, and over on the 57. Houston Cougars versus the Oklahoma Sooners. Oklahoma favored by 25. I have Oklahoma winning, Houston covering, and under on the over-under of 80. Notre Dame Irish versus the Louisville Cardinals. Notre Dame favored by 20.5. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 57.5. And last but not least, we have the UCLA Bruins versus the Cincinnati Bearcats. Bearcats favored by 3. I have them winning, covering, and under on the 60.5. That is going to be your week 1. 54 games here on Robert Sports Show. Like I said, the plan is to do 50 games a week. So next week I'll probably do 46 and make it even 50 each week. Just came up with the idea today, so that's why it's 54 here, and you go through and cut anything. But we definitely want to take a look at that. Take a look at the CFL Week 11, first week on the Robert Sports Show. Take a look at the Heisman Watch 2020. Take a look at the playoff predictions. All going to be here on Robert Sports Show. NFL Week 1 coming in 2 weeks. NCAA Week 2 coming in 2 weeks, since they kind of split Week 1 into 2. Let's get it all up at once. If there's any comments, please leave those below. If you're a pro wrestling fan, make sure you check out all the pro wrestling stuff here on Robert Sports Show. Follow me on Twitter at Rob Sports Show. So definitely check it all out. And don't just have a great day. Have a spiffy day. Robert Sports Show, your YouTube leader, sports content.